Guess what? It's another episode of AUA. I might have started a little too early, so we're now online, I'm sure. So let me try it again. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for coming to another episode of Ask Us Anything, AUA. And again, it's Josh and Denny. Good
Hey, Denny, what's
afternoon,
going
Josh.
on?
Good morning, I
Uh,
guess, huh?
well, yeah, it just
It's
turned
still good
noon
morning.
around here, so I guess it is technically afternoon. How's it going?
Good, good, good. So,
Cool.
so today we keep switching formats slightly, but it doesn't matter. But we are switching location. So I'm not at my usual location. I'm actually down in Los Angeles. Might have to do it from the Los Angeles. I go down here to with my parents for them to Chinese medical doctor. So it might just work out.
Very cool.
So
Yes.
you want to introduce the show and just get on with it because I know you have a
Yeah.
deadline that you have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Last show, Denny and I, I kind of we did something a little bit different. I said, well, Denny, you pick. Well, first it was three topics, but then we narrowed it to one each. I said, Denny, pick a topic that we've never talked about on the show before, and I'll pick something that we've either never talked or rarely talked about, and it'll be something fresh because Denny and I sometimes we rehash the same things, and it was good. So but this time I wanted to push it even a little further, and I said, well, let's choose a well-known Dharma topic, but let's give our own unique spin on it or mention something that most people don't really look at it in that way, and with the catch of, well, we're not going to tell each other what we're going to talk about. So that way I was thinking maybe we can get a more spontaneous nature to the conversation. But the old diehard professor in Denny, he told me right away what it was. He got pretty enthusiastic about it. And I was like, Denny, you're not supposed to tell me. But I'm like, well, this is so good what Denny's topic is today because it does warrant the presentation he put together. And he puts so much work and time and effort into this. So again, I'm probably going to most likely just back out of the way here, and we'll just kind of feel out the times when between the transitions and the slides or whenever Denny feels it's good for me to chime in, because I don't really want to interrupt the flow if you might see
Yeah,
me taking
it's
little notes or something so I don't interrupt the flow. So when I have time to comment, I can. So
yeah. So sometimes it's hard to translate languages, and only because the culture is so different. So if you try to translate the word spontaneous, it would end up being chaotic. So the Chinese culture doesn't allow itself to be so spontaneous,
that's pretty
and
accurate too, because
yeah, not
a
to
lot of times
mention
it
about
does
my own,
become
yeah.
it
Yeah.
does become chaotic, right? A lot of times. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
so I do like to pre-plan and then and then try to make it spontaneous, as part of my planning. Yeah, today's topic is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time actually, and because and I think the timing is just right, and the reason why I've been holding back has a lot to do with students on our Saturday practice. So we launch, well, we always had Saturday practice, but we launch it on the real Insight Timer platform, and it was really overwhelming in terms of the response. Josh and I were saying that now finally we're preaching to the choir. We're actually in a community of people uh, who have kind of dedicate themselves to spiritual practice of all form, yoga, meditation, chanting, all that. And so we were very happy. But still, it took us a couple months, I think, for us to finally have a group of students who are repeating students. And this is a very important thing for us because now that we have students that we can practice together, we can kind of slowly bring them along and always kind of put the carrot in front of them saying, hey, this is where we're going, this is where we're going. So it's time, I think it's important now for us to really talk about the practice as something that is beyond just physical fitness, and talk about it really in terms of what Josh and I think of a practice, which is that of a spiritual practice. So that's on one side, and the other side is that this is, after all, AUA, Ask Us Anything. So it is based on some questions that come from the students. So one of the questions that came from the student, and then it was echoed by other students, which is, could we stop midway and then continue, because depending on the time. So, for example, in the morning is evening in Asia, and then the evening is morning in somewhere else, and so forth and so on. So a lot of students say, well, I can only commit to the first hour, but I don't want to miss the second hour. Can I pick it up on the recording? And then another student says, well, what if I don't have time for the whole thing, and then I just pick the one that really resonates with me, and I'll practice that. And so the quick answer to that is yes, and yes. Definitely. You can practice in any sequence. You can practice it at any time, so forth. But having said that, I still would like to kind of talk about the rhymes and reasons for what we do. What are we trying to achieve from the beginning to the end? And so the topic that I picked today, and I thank Josh for indulging me on this, is the idea of there's some understanding of form and formless, because we use that all the time. Is form, and then eventually formless, or rupa to a rupa. And I think it might, if I want to pick, if I don't want to modify that topic, it would be form to formless and beyond. So, but for now, I think just stick with that topic. And so, I want to just use that as a launch point for a rather in-depth discussions of the entirety of our spiritual practice. How do we start, and where we're trying to achieve, but if we ever get there. And so, so to do that, I want to kind of review a little bit of what we have talked about in some previous presentation. And I always like to go back to good old Einstein, and I like this picture. I like this picture a lot. And rather than kind of talk about what Einstein has done, which is tremendous, I just like to kind of take what he have contribute and try to put that in the context of a spiritual study. So one of the things that you notice in this picture is that Einstein hold up a apparatus, and that's for the measurement of time. It's a timer. But what is interesting about this is that you actually don't start with time. You actually start with space. And it's only because you have space. And so the beginning of the universe is all about space. It's all about the creation of space. And it's only when you have space that there's a use for time, right? I mean, I can talk about how long it would take for me to travel all the way to St. Louis to meet up with Josh for coffee. But if you and I were in the same room, then we won't be talking about that. We won't be talking about how long it would take for me to get to where he is. So if space does not exist in the universe, then there's no reason for time to exist in the universe. You have to go somewhere, right? We always said that, if you're stuck in the traffic, why worry about, how to be on time? You're stuck in the traffic. So the idea of something, the universe starting with space, the creation of space, and then once space appears, then the necessity for time becomes important. Time is a measurement that you have a metric. Then you can measure. And one of the most important things to measure is something called rising and fading away, or fading. Meaning that now you can actually monitor something and says, oh, it came into existence, and then it just kind of slowly rises in some natural phenomenon, and then eventually it would just die off. If you didn't have time, then there's no way to do that. Now, once you know how something rises and fading, then you can say, well, is there anything that won't rise and won't fail? That it will always be there. And then the idea of particle versus wave become meaningful. That particle is material. Material has a way of rising and failing. That it comes into existence. Like you take a bunch of atoms, and these are carbon atoms. They're no different. They're the same carbon atom whether they eventually form a diamond or that they just form coal, right? But in the time of the universe, they have to come together. These carbon atom has to come together, and that's called the rising. And eventually they would dissipate, and that's called the failing. But that phenomenon is true for a particular class of existence that we call particle, whereas the wave is something that won't do that. It's something that will not dissipate. That's the difference. Now, when you say wave, well, obviously we talk about electromagnetic propagation. That's what it means. And now a question that would come up and says, well, that's not true, because if the electromagnetic radiation comes from a star, as I move away from the star, won't it start to fade? And the answer to that is no, actually no. It doesn't fade. It fades in intensity because the total surface area have increased, but in terms of the amount of energy, it hasn't faded. Now, the reason that Einstein was interested in this is that he actually started out with a very different purpose in life. He was trying to argue that there was no such thing as ether. Now, back in the days, when we talk about propagation, every energy, any sound wave and whatever, it needs a medium, right? So sound has to travel in air, has to travel through a railroad rail. But if you have vacuum, then sound won't propagate. So this kind of energy requires a medium. And Einstein basically says, well, it's different for electromagnetic radiation, electromagnetic propagation. And so this idea that our planets, between the planets, there are these medium called ether, he says, no, that couldn't be the case. So he actually started out by proving that there cannot be any ether. And if there's no ether, there's no propagation media, and the speed of light would have to be constant. And it's because the speed of light is constant, then that is the characteristic of wave, and everything else would be particle. That's how his logic works. Now, what's interesting about that is that you can't have everything in the universe being constant. So if you make the assumption, and this assumption could very well be wrong. This is the thing about science, is that everything that we ever assume is wrong. It's just right at the time, right? That's why, when Galileo came along, Newton has to correct him, and when, Einstein came along, then he has to correct Newton, and when Stephen Hawking came along, he has to correct Einstein. That's progress. Okay, so don't assume that physics is something that is true and forever true. It's an assumption. I actually call it a superstition. Superstition. It's something that you believe in because you couldn't believe in anything else. But the point is that the end result of all that is that time cannot be absolute. In other words, the time where Josh is sitting and the time that I'm sitting might actually be the same clock, may actually be the same, but there's no reason for them. There's no reason, there's no governing law that says that time has to be absolute in all corners of the universe. And that is the conclusion that Einstein come to, that I think is most relevant in what we do. Now, so if time is not absolute, then every corner of the universe can have different time. And one of the argument that Einstein made is that, he says that makes absolute sense, because if you are with a beautiful girl, then your time must be different than if you were sitting on a hot cinder. I'll come to that in a minute. But if I were to look at the universe in terms of what's called the time dilation, relativity of time, then I can classify in terms of regions where time is gradually comes to zero, comes to stand still. And that actually is what's called black hole. And so the black hole has what is called the singularity, where time comes to a standstill and material no longer exists. There's no possibility of material, that there's only wave. And then there's another region called the event horizons, where you're getting close into the black hole, and now the time was slowed down, right? And so it turns out that the Buddhists have been doing that for ages, and the Buddhists have. You were going to say, Josh? I
Well,
should
I
have
might
given
as
you a
well.
sense of
No, it's
comment. Yeah.
okay. I might as well jump in now. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
It's
Yeah, I should do that every time
No,
we
it's
change slides.
okay.
Yeah.
We're feeling it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing, though, because sometimes we'll get into a transition where it messes up the transition too.
That's
So
okay. That's okay.
we'll figure it out. So the
Okay.
double slit experiment, a few things. The double slit experiment, you know about that, right? Where you probably know how to explain it than me about the particle going to a wave and wave to a particle depending on the observer effect. And I thought, well, that's interesting to maybe factor in here. And like you're saying, yes, these are all theories. It's the theory of relativity, right? It can't really be mathematically proven, or maybe I don't. This is way beyond my pay grade. And also, I've mentioned this question before too. And I was looking at Quora, this site on the internet that answers questions and whatnot. And there is a post on it, but I can't really pretend to understand a lot of it. But what is the speed of time? So if we have does time have a speed too? And I think the reason why that might be relevant is because, if somebody's traveling faster than another person, well, then that affects different times too, right? The classic thing, if you're traveling so fast, you can cover all this ground and come back. Well, it's like only a small amount of time passed for the person going really fast, but the person that wasn't going as fast, they might have aged a long time. We hear this theory too. Then you get into stuff like sci-fi stuff, like the grandfather paradox, but I don't think that's really relevant here. So again, so Denny, about the double slit experiment, and then I don't really know if the speed of time, if that's even relevant either. But
Yeah. So yeah, those are interesting topics to explore. But let me try to keep it simple by just drawing the parallel between what Einstein says, which is that time is not necessary. There's no reason for time to be absolute. That each corner of the universe can have its own time, and if you rank the universe in terms of its time, then you get to a point where time will come to a standstill, and that's at the singularity of the black hole, and that's the place where it's just pure wave now. There's no particle. And what Josh said is correct in that we talk about particle wave duality as well, that the particle and the wave are interchangeable. Anyway, so in the Buddhist teaching, actually this didn't come from Buddha. He didn't invent it. This is actually the yogic tradition. This is actually something that Buddha himself had learned as when he was a yogi, that they separate the universe in this way. And so in this case, I used Einstein's language, and he says that, well, if you're sitting on top of a hot cinder, then as far as you're concerned, then time just it's a very, very long time. And then whereas if you go to and you actually be with hot girls, and time would go very, very fast. And so the idea is that this universe has these extremes where time takes a long, long time, and then it seems like it's very, very fast. And so if we were to put that now, this is a solar system, and obviously humans only reside on the third planet, but in that scale of time, there is a region called the human realm. This is where the human reside. And then now, if I were to take the black hole and just turn it upside down, then at the very tip of the singularity, where there's no particle whatsoever, it's just pure energy. Then that's probably what what Buddha would refer to as liberation, or as enlightenment, where you're completely outside of your attachment to material. Now, somewhere in here, and again, I will mention this because it just happens to be a big part of our popular culture. I talk about this film called Interstellar, and that was done by Professor who's the professor, the Caltech professor, who's in the middle, who's one of the three people that received the Nobel Prize about 5 years ago. They actually received it for gravitational wave, and so I suspect after his retirement and he was waiting, Professor Thorne, who was waiting for his Nobel Prize. You can't get a Nobel Prize until someone proves your theory. So he had to be the one that he and a group of scientists had to go out there to prove the existence of the gravitational wave. So he was waiting for the result. So he got into filmmaking, and he made this movie called The Interstellar, where part of the story was that the astronaut got stuck in this planet called the planet Miller, which is outside of the event horizon of the black hole. But the storyline was that they were supposed to be there just very quickly and come back, just explore to see if one of the, if they have any people there, and they were supposed to leave, but because of some mechanical accidents, they were stuck there for 3 hours, and so when they returned to the spaceship, the friend who were the same age as they were when they left had aged, and in fact had aged 21 years, because every hour on planet Miller is equivalent to 7 years in our region. Now, if you work out the math, that translates to be about 150 years, and so that corresponds to this region. Any case, this is just for putting the two things in perspective here. Now, of course, when we study this chart in depth, we separate into 3 regions. And last time when Josh and I talked about practicing in the desire realm, that's the lower part. That's the lower part where human is right below what's called the heavenly realm. And then above that, you have the different realm of called the heaven. I'm sure it's not the same as the heavens among the Protestants or the Catholics. It's just a word used differently. Probably one of the most famous heavenly realm is the one that is right on top, and this is the story where Buddha had became awakened sitting under the Bodhi tree, and his spirit had rise above the human realm, reaching this top realm, and then he was encountered by Mara, who is the guardian for this realm. His job is to prevent any beings from escaping the desire realm. Now, of course, just for completeness, below the human, then we have the hell, the hungry ghosts, the animals, and something called Azura. So this is, we mentioned this before, this is what we call the desire realm. Now, we talk a lot about jhana too. Right before the show, Josh and I talk about potentially inviting someone who is experimenting with jhana realm. And so this is actually, above that is when we start to talk about the form realm. And above that is when we talk about the formless realm. And so one of the things I want to do is explain what is form and what is formless, and is there beyond, right? So the idea is that this is actually called the 8 levels of samadhi. So there's the 4 levels here that coincide with the 4 jhana, and then there's another 4 levels that go up in the formless realm. Now, there's another way to look at, and of course, when we say samsara is the constant rebirth. So when you die, your energy doesn't dissipate, and it becomes the starting point of another entity. So when we talk about that, we don't just talk about samsara within the desire realm. That someone could actually be practicing and elevated himself into the upper realm. So, Josh, you were going to say something?
Yeah, it's a few things. Well, Denny said we have a guest maybe that's been experimenting with, and I think maybe that might be confused with, we might have talked previously either on the show or off show about how I found it was interesting to have people that have actually experienced these realms and visited them in consciousness and explored. Because I remember, if I'm remembering right, Joseph Goldstein, which is a pretty popular lay teacher, his teacher, is it Meninderji? He said he would have people that he was training with or practicing with. He would give them assignments to go into these realms and report back what they've seen. So that's where I kind of heard of that. Now, the potential guest we're talking about maybe having on. Now I don't know if she's done something similar to that, but I know she's practiced the jhanas under a pretty famous teacher. So so I guess it's just dependent on what Denny and I ask her. She might have done some experimenting too. We can find that out. The other thing, a few things I wanted to say was, you hear sometimes in, I guess it's Christian, the seven heavens. So I wonder, and that's another question I talked to Denny about too, or asked, we chatted about, is I wonder if anybody's ever done a comparative study with cosmologies, kind of interlinking them or showing parallels. I know throughout all kinds of different ancient traditions, there are a lot of parallels, but under different names and whatnot. So I think it would be fascinating to do a or as close to comprehensive as possible study, cross-comparing cosmologies between things. And then the last thing is, isn't it 31 realms? So these can be subdivided into 30, because I know there's different hell realms too in the Buddhist cosmology, right?
Okay. Now, one other thing I want to add, and this is because when we talk to students and teachers and so forth, people talk a lot about their experience, that they thought that they are actually experiencing something beyond, and so the question is that, so where was I, right? And so I thought this is interesting. So when we talk about the six senses, the translations are interesting. So, for example, the Chinese, they use the word door. So when they talk about the six senses being the eye, the nose, the tongue, the ear, the skin, and the mind being the thinking mind, because this is all the bodily sensors. Then the Chinese actually introduced the word door. So there's a sense door, and with the idea that we're now supposed to be the doorman guarding our senses. But if you go back to the original language and you see how the way it was written in Pali, it's actually Set Indra. So first of all, Set is six. So got that. Now, what exactly is Indra? Indra is actually the name of a diva, the diva king, who is in this region, the Tiva Timisa. Well, now of course the is known as Tamatisa. Now, of course, among the Chinese, that diva king is known by a more common name, which is called the Jade Emperor. The Jade Emperor, in the Chinese folklore, is someone who oversees, all the beings, the human beings, the animals, and perhaps the angels and whatever. So now, if you look up the word Indra, then Indra is the name, is the Jade Emperor, and Indra means that all of those who are consistent with Indra, meaning that what we call six senses is by design limited to only to what Jade Emperor can see. So there is no possibility of us experiencing anything beyond that using our earthly presence. So anytime you have anyone who tell you about what they're experiencing, just have an open mind, and keep reminding yourself that as is written in Pali, it says that you can only go up to this point with your six senses. Okay, interesting. And so now, go ahead, Josh.
Oh. And then, I think there's a word too in Pali, ayatana, and, not only, and I don't know how that comes in here exactly, but the indriya, it's like the five faculties, right? That's another That's another term in practice that they use indriya in, and that's for a different time. But I just wanted to point out that yes, there are five senses, and it's also known as the five doors, like Denny said, five sense or six sense doors. I'm sorry. Some people always, guarding the sense gates. So sometimes they're known as the sense gates. Sometimes they're called
Gate
the
is
sense.
probably more accurate. Yeah, gate is probably
Right.
more accurate.
Some people, the six sense spheres, some people call them, and some people call them the six sense bases. So there's all kinds of different terminology, and sometimes in certain contexts, different words are more helpful than others. And I think it's interesting to say, Denny talks about people describing their experiences. Of course, we know that what we try to put language to and depict in images is not the exact same thing as the actual experience. We're trying to describe that experience, right? And when you get
So
up to these higher
qualify
levels,
what I. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me
Well, I was
qualify
real
what I
quick
just said.
that
Yeah. Okay, go ahead,
when we
Josh. Sorry.
one last thing when we get into really the ultimate goal here, there is no way to you can't accurately describe it with words. So a lot of times you get things that just point at it, right? So the finger
Right.
pointing at the moon, because there's no way you can possibly, language is totally inadequate, images are totally inadequate, but okay.
Yeah. So thank you, Josh. So the thing that I want to qualify what I said, I might have overstated it, is that I don't mean that you couldn't experience beyond that. I just meant that you couldn't experience it with your body, and your brain is part of your body. Now, that doesn't mean that you couldn't experience it with your mind, your pure mind, right? So, and just so that it's beyond my capability to even imagine that. And so, anyway, so again, using the same chart and just kind of just compare, and we're still in the review right now. Something that we talked about in the past is that when you talk about Taoist, because a lot of our practice comes from the Taoist, and so one of the things that I always want to remind people is that until Bodhidharma came along, Bodhidharma was a yogi who visited China about 1500 years ago. Until he came along, all the Taoists were alchemists. And it's only after the Chinese learned meditation from Bodhidharma that they were able to refine the technique, and they went from what's called the external Dan to the internal Dan. That it's not something they just swallow, but it's actually something that is developed within them. This actually is much more consistent with the original intent of the Taoist teaching, other than the alchemist part, because you remember we had a talk about the difference between Qigong, and which is a very modern term, versus the original term, which is called Taoyin, right? So the word Tao in that case is not the same as the Taoist. It's actually just the word for the Taoist. Interestingly, it's written in two parts. One part is the head, and then the other part is the boat, and together represents the path. So it's someone who's on a boat, and so that would mean a path, a waterway. Whereas the Tao Yin is the same word, but with the another word added to it called inch. So in that case, the Tao Yin is the guiding, it's the guidance. And then when you go to the yen, is actually the same word for enticing, for something that if you want to, one of the very famous proverbs that we use where that word came up is that you want to entice the snake to come out from the cave. And so it's interesting to think about those two words to really understand that the original Chinese, other than the alchemists, they were really focused on bringing something from within. It wasn't about, so when we talk about development of Qigong, it wasn't, Qigong is not something that is external and now you want to practice and get more of. It's the complete opposite, where it is already in you, and now you just want to find a way to guide it and to entice it to come out, right? And so Taoists, their practice is about elevating from the human realm. Okay, so it's always about this. This has been the focus. Is the focus? Is all the meditation is. So in that case, you can think of the Taoist practice as a very subset of the yogic practice, but it's very easy. Much more accessible. Especially for us when we talk about qi and all that, it's much more accessible. And forget for a minute that it's only focused on the desire realm. Now, whereas the yogic practice is actually beyond the desire realm and is now into what's called the form and formless realm, and this entire space is called Brahman, and which is the name of one of the Diva king, and so the word yoga means mind and body to be one, right? Now, but it's interesting when you study that, what they call mind is actually Brahman. And so a purified mind for them is the mind of a Brahman. And so they actually believe that the North Indians, the people who consider themselves the upper caste, they actually believe that they are descendants of Brahman, the Brahman king. Okay, and then all they're trying to do is return to that. Yeah, go ahead.
And this is why the caste is called the Brahmins, right?
Yes,
the Brahmin
yes, the caste is called the Brahmin.
Yeah.
Yes,
But
yeah.
in
So
Buddhism, in Buddhism, there's the Brahma Vihara, so it's kind of reframed. Instead of something outside ourselves we're trying to get to, we have these natural innate qualities that we can radiate, right?
Yes, yes. So the Brahma Vihara is the house of the Brahman. Is the house of the Brahman. So those are the four corners. So when you go to some rich people's house back in the old days, they would have different rooms where they would meet the guests separately, and each one has its own theme. So if you have a scholar, they would invite you. It's like the White House, where you have the Lincoln Room and all that. And so the four rooms, is of the Brahman. Each one has its own characteristics.
And in the middle of a lot of these houses, or with Vedic architecture, is the Brahmastan. The Brahmastan, so it's the thing from the very center that ties the whole room together, right?
Yeah. So the
meeting place of everything.
So when Josh talked about the Brahma Vihara, that's the compassion, loving kindness, empathy, and equanimity. That represents the four corner of the house of Brahman. Now. So it's important to keep in mind that the historical Buddha was a yogi and has always been. And in fact, in his 7 years as a wandering yogi, he was able to. We talked about this in the past, that he was able to find two very good teachers and taught him so that he actually reached the uppermost of the 8 levels of samadhi. And yet he was not satisfied. He was not satisfied that even when you reach the rupa realm, the formless realm, that you're still not completely liberated. And so eventually he came up with his teaching, which is the Buddhist teaching, that allow him to escape not only the desire realm and not only the form realm, but also the formless realm. And with that, he has completely removed himself from what is called samsara. Right? So that's the difference between the Buddhist teaching, the yogic teaching, and the Taoist teaching. Now, of course, we're sitting way down here and we're looking up. And so anything I can get my hands on to elevate me, to get me a better status, I would do it. And so that's why you will see that going back to our practice now, whether or not we can do this in piecemeal or whether or not we can do that, in disjointed manner. And the answer is yes, because we're so far away from, like my master would tell me, it's okay. You're still very far from nirvana. So at this moment, it's okay. Just do whatever that helps you. Yeah.
Yeah, and Denny, you can't buy this at Costco either, right?
And you can't find this at Costco. You can't get discount on. You can't get discount on volume. Okay. Okay. So just that's why our practice have so many different elements to it, because it's a very pragmatic way of elevating ourselves. So part of it is the Taoist, the the 12 energy line is very Taoist. The energy point is Taoist, but yet we do a little bit of yoga, in the traditional sense, right? And then ultimately, there's a big part of us that are rooted in the Buddhist teaching. Okay.
And when I came across this saying, I think it's a reading in the suttas where somebody asked, like, well, what happens after enlightenment is realized? Will I exist? Won't I exist? Will I both exist and not exist? Or will I neither exist nor not exist? And the answer was given was none of that even applies.
None of that
So
applies because
it's beyond our comprehension, because some people will get, scared that life will go on forever and ever and ever. Some people are the opposite, the other extreme of annihilation, like there'll be nothing. So those things we can't really fathom or comprehend because those things don't even apply to the ultimate goal, right?
Thank you for that, Josh, because back to my first slide about Einstein and his idea, how he came to this idea of relative time, I said that the starting point is space. Existence is space. Existence is separation. So again, if there's no separation between Josh and I, that we are one and the same, then there's no existence. There's no distinction between our existence, right? So if there's no separation between Josh and I, and there's no separation between Josh and I and the rest of the universe, then we don't exist in that sense.
That's right, but it's not non-existence either, because that doesn't really apply either. When space, we can't really fathom anything without space and time. Most of us can't. There's no way to really fathom or comprehend when that's taken out of the equation entirely.
Maybe the next slide would help a bit, just a little bit. So the question now is what is form? What is rupa? Right? So because the title of the talk is form and formless. So rupa, like the rupa realm and the A-rupa realm. So every time you see an A, is the opposite, right? So the rupa. So the definition of rupa is form, is material form. Okay. Now, I just want to list some examples of how that word is used, and this hopefully will come back to what Josh just talks about. So one of the most common way of the usage of the word rupa is together with the word called Gaia. And Gaia, we know, because Gaia means body. And so when we talk about the four foundations of mindfulness, the first foundation is the mindfulness of the body. But actually, body is Gaia. It's not just the body, but everything that is physical for us. So when we use the phrase rupa Gaia, it has a very important original meaning. And it has to do with Buddha. And so when Buddha, so I follow up the train of thought here. So when Buddha became awakened, he no longer exists. No longer exists in the sense that he no longer has a boundary to his existence, that he's one of all together, right? But in order for him to actually give benefits to the beings, he has to attain some kind of form. Okay, it's not different from now. I'm sure I'll step on some toes with saying that, but think about the word incarnate. Jesus was incarnate. I mean, this was in the Bible. So Jesus was the Son of God, and in order for him to help us, he has to incarnate into his body. That's why it had to be a virgin birth, right? So the idea of the word rupa Gaia, original use is when Buddha had a different body. What he had was called a Dhamma Gaia, which is a different kind of existence. But in order for him to actually show up in a phase, he would have to incarnate into a physical form. So the word rupa Gaia is used that way. Okay. Now there's another way that rupa is used, which is in one of the 5 skandhas. And so the word Kendra is the same as Skandha. Skandha is Sanskrit and Kendra is Pali. And so for those who have heard of the 5 skandhas, then rupa represents the first one, which is everything. So for example, earlier I talked about how your six senses is in Pali is called set indra, and you cannot experience anything beyond the Jade Emperor. And I'm talking about rupa. I'm talking about just the physical form that you cannot experience. And so beyond the physical form, then the rest are the mind form. The rest are come after the rupa, after the form. You have the sensation. We talked a little bit about that: sensation, perception, volition, and then consciousness. The other four has to do with mind, pure mind, not thinking mind. Whereas the first part, the rupa in this case is called rupa kendra or rupa skendra, is the totality of everything that is physical. So it's not just about our body, the eye, the nose, the mouth, the ear, and the skin, and our thinking brain, but which is the physiology, but also the physics, the sound that comes to the hum to our ear, the sight that comes to our eye, the smell, the taste, and all that. So all of that together is called rupa. So in that case, form represents everything that is physical around us. Now there's another way. Go ahead, Josh.
Oh, sure. The one other translation I've heard of rupa is materiality. So, and then Namarupa, which we'll get to, mentality, materiality, but we'll get back to that, or we'll get to that.
That's very good. Mm-hmm. That's very good. Yeah.
Because it's a subtle distinction. But now Denny's just pronunciation here, I thought it was interesting. It sounds more to me like Gaia, which some people will actually call the name of the earth, which I thought was real interesting. Now I've heard this pronounced with a K, Kaya. Like Dharmakaya. I mean, it's very similar with the K, but and then the other one,
Kaya Skanda, is probably correct. Yeah, Kaya is probably correct.
It might be. And then Skanda and the Skandhas, the Khandas. So I don't know for sure. There might be some distinctions, but just for the audio only people, the Kaya is Kaya with a mark above the A, and then the Khandas or Skandhas are it's Khandha. Denny's got, and then the thing with Nibbana though, about taking a human form. So I guess if I'm getting this right in the Theravada tradition, there's a Nibbana, but then there's Paranibbana. So when the actual physical form passes away, right, then it's considered paranibbana. So I think that's how Theravada deals with it. And so I guess in the Mahayana it's considered a dharmakaya. So it's a different type of body. So yeah, I'm not too familiar with the Mahayana way to do it either. But yeah, so they're subtle distinctions, but they're both. I find them both helpful. So the more information I have on this, the better for me. So.
Yeah. So another way, and one last point, another way that the word rupa appear is, as Josh had mentioned already, that is in the another terminology called Namarupa. And in this case, some people would just translate that into name and form. Nama is name and form. But actually, I like Josh bringing up the idea between materiality versus, what's the other, mentality.
Mentality.
Yeah. So this is very important. So this phrase Namarupa appear in the 12 links of interdependent origination, starting with ignorance, going to sankhara, which is mental volition, going to consciousness, and then finally to the Namarupa. And so actually Namarupa in that case is really the most encompassing term for mind, with the idea that within mind there is the pure mind and then there's the thinking mind. And so if you say, well, isn't a brain part of a mind? And my argument to that is yes, but it's the thinking part of the mind, it's the materiality part of the mind. Whereas when we talk about the mind as in the remaining of the four skandhas, the perception, the sensation, perception, volition, and consciousness, that would be the the spirituality, or what Josh said is the mentality part of the mind. Okay, and just a quick point. This is actually very important that when you try to understand the 12 links of interdependence, that everything starts with ignorance. Ignorance is actually a karma. That's a seed from a karma. So when someone goes out and murders someone, doing mass murder or whatever, it's not because he started with external factors like I happen to look Chinese and he hated me. No, because the hate comes from within, that his karma is full of hate, and there was a seed. And the question is, when does that become real? What not real as in real imaginary, but where he is become actionable. But the important thing is that it all starts with the ignorant seed, and from that the next step is called the volition, where that seed becomes consciousness, becomes something that he wants to exercise. Now then it goes to the next one of the chain, which is Namarupa. That's our mind. That is a mind that it goes from the mentality mind and actually realizes itself in the materiality mind, your brain. That's when he goes out and he try to locate the people and the gun and so forth. And so I like the word Namarupa because it represents the combination of a mind, both the physical mind and the spirituality mind, or what Josh called the materialistic part and the spiritualistic part. Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, it's this is reminded me. I wanted to say at the beginning that the understandings we're talking about here, realize that any kind of understanding we think you can get from these talks and whatnot, that's pretty much kind of a hearsay, because what we ultimately want to do, we want to see and know this for ourselves, right? And this can be what we're doing here, a great aid, but just keep that in the back of the mind that this is all just things for you to check out for your own experience. It's not to be believed, it's to be put into practice and try it and see if it to know and see for yourself. And then the Buddha's, one of the unique things he is said to offer was the codependent arising or interdependent dependent origination. There's a few other terms, translations for it as well. One of the unique things about this is why it's what we often think of it starting in ignorance and going in one direction all the time. Realize that we can wake up on kind of not any, but various parts of the 12 links. And so when we actually have our experience where we realize that, oh, this link is now in play, well, then that's kind of our starting point temporarily, right? We use ignorance because that's when we teach it or when it's being taught, that's the best starting point. But it is a wheel, right? So it's not like a linear thing either. It just keeps going round and round and round. And then there's also the opposite of the whole, what is it? Maybe Denny can help me out. I don't even know what it's called, but the wholesome part, like not the cycle, but no, I'm blanking on this. But it's not talked about as much as it's kind of more like the liberating wheel instead of like the. But I don't know. Maybe I'll make a note to see if I can find what I'm talking about.
Okay. Okay.
Bad to mention if I can't even remember it.
Yeah. So back to the chart that I showed earlier about the three realms. So the practice is really about moving from the desire realm to form realm, and then ultimately to the formless realm. But what's interesting is that Buddha wants to go beyond that. So the question then is that what is he trying to go beyond to, right? And so now I'm going to bring up this other concept called nimitta. And nimitta, it's not talked about as much in the Western culture as it is in the Chinese culture. The Chinese culture is all about this word, nimitta. And so I just want to say that rupa is a little bit, form is very different from nimitta. And so I see translation of nimitta as a sign,
Let me jump in here real quick, Denny, with the pronunciation. I've heard it pronounced nimitta. Some people pronounce it nimitta. So either way, just so we know what we're talking about.
Thank you. So nimitta is translated as sign, but rather than trying to figured out whether that is the correct translation or not, because the word nimitta is most commonly talked about in the Diamond Sutra, And now, one of the translations for the Diamond Sutra is that they actually translate that Chinese word, the nimitta, into something called notion, the four notions. So what does that mean? So in the Diamond Sutra, then they talk about the notion of self, the notion of human, the notion of beings, and the notion of time, a lifespan. Now, and the idea is that when do you have the notion of self? So again, this is identity, or this is distinction, or what Josh talked about earlier, which is about existence. So think about this. So you wake up, you're lying in bed, you slept all night, and you wake up. What's the first thing you do? You figured out if you exist or not. You figured out where am I? Where did I sleep? Sometimes you wake up, you don't know where you were. So that is the notion of self. You're trying to find your own existence. Okay, so that's the notion of self. Now, if you were Buddha waking up, he probably doesn't even care where he wakes up, right? Now, the idea of notion of humans is that like Josh and I are both humans, as opposed to our pets, which is not humans, right? And so the idea that humans belong a class to itself, that's a very interesting notion. The idea is that besides humans, there are different beings. Some of them are things that we can embrace, like the pets, the animals, and some of them we might not want to embrace, like the hungry ghosts or whatever, right? And then finally, the idea that there is a limit or unlimited time span for existence. Now, what's interesting is that they all belong to this idea of time and space. And so when Buddha talk about being enlightened, he's really talking about the opposite of nimitta, which is called animitta, or translated as sinus. Okay, now it gets very complicated, but the point is that when you are finally freeing yourself, not only of your desire, not only of form, not only of your formless, because even then you haven't achieved enlightenment. You're still stuck in the three realm, forever rebirth. And what Buddha basically says is that in order to, once you escape that, you are beyond space and time. You are now at the singularity of the black hole. That's enlightenment. Now, this is important. Hang on, Josh. The reason I mentioned that is not to cause any more confusion, but to say that ultimately is our purpose of our spiritual practice. Sorry, Josh. Go ahead, please.
No, yeah, and it's really important, and I'm glad you brought this out because I'm not familiar with this. The context I know nimitta in is the practicing the jhanas. So it's completely different from. I'm pretty sure it's spelled the same way. Maybe I'm mistaking something here, but there's supposedly.
I think you're correct. Correct. They are. It's a question of, if the question is that are they the same train, the answer is yeah, they're the same train. They just have different stops.
Oh, that might be it. Because jhana practice, some people talk about seeing this sign or this light, and it's supposed to be incorporated into samatha practice when you're doing these jhana practices to go through the jhanas. But I'm not experienced or qualified enough to talk about this, other than to say, now I know when some people who practice jhanas and absorption practices and samatha practice, they have a very kind of like, there's particularities around nimittas or not nimittas, or how to use the nimitta in practice, how not, So there's all these different variations and whatnot. And, a side note here, I recently found it fascinating that one of the teachers that I know in real life, she said she's been working for a while on all these different types of practices to get into jhana states and how many different versions there are. Again, if I'm remembering that correctly, maybe more information to come when that's available to release publicly. But yeah, as far as this goes, Denny, this is breaking down these notions, of existence. It's a very helpful self. More specifically into delineating between humans and different types of beings, and then of course our lifespan, because some of these higher realms they said to have so long of lifespans, right? I mean, compared to ours. Yeah.
Or vice versa. Our lifespan is so much longer than, some of the lower species. Like
that's right. It's relative.
Right?
It depends on your perspective and viewpoint, or what being you are and what being you're looking at, right?
Yeah. Okay, so now I took an hour to kind of lay down the background and to review. So now I want to get into the practice itself, and the practice starts with understanding of rupa, understanding of a material form, and so remember I talked about the rupa skandha as something that combines both the physiology with the physics. And so the question is, how are the two related? And I like this chart. Hang on just 1 second. This is a good one. But so let's do this one first. Sorry, I did it out of sequence. So we talk. So this is another way to classify the physics, classify the external. So we call this the four elements. The four elements. And then there's another way to classify it, which is the sight, the sound, the smell, the taste, and the touch, and its corresponding sense door. So sight would be the eye, the sound would be the ear, and the smell would be the nose, and the taste would be the tongue, and the touch is the skin, is the body. So this particular way of explaining I like a lot, and it came from a monk in Hong Kong. Actually, it's actually one of my grandmaster. So it basically says that what is earth, rather than trying to argue, earth means, dirt. No. Earth is something very simple. Earth is something you can see, you can smell, you can taste, and you can touch. If you could do all four, that's earth element. Now, if it's something that you can see, you can taste, you can touch, but you cannot smell, that is called the water element. If it's something that you can see and you can touch, but you cannot smell or taste, that is called the fire element. But if it's something that you cannot see, you cannot smell, you cannot taste, but you can touch, that's called the wind element. So wind element is not just airflow; it's actually all your neural sensation. If you feel anything, so if you feel pain, for example, then it's a combination of the wind and the earth element. Okay, now the reason I want to do that, and let me come back to this slide. This is actually a very important slide. Over the years that I've been an attendant for Master Jiru, he has said things that it's just profound to me, and it's something that I would just record in my brain, and then it would just resurface itself every once in a while, and I would keep going back to trying to gain more appreciation and more understanding. The first thing he said, which he has only said in English for some reason, and a lot of times he said it in Chinese and he translated in English. So this is something that he said only in English, and he says, there is no mind. And I'm being a mechanical engineering professor. I said, well, that's what I used to say, that there is no gravity. And Master Jiru gone on and says, there is only the effect of mind, because there's only the effect of gravity. In other words, you're being a being in the desire realm. You should not think that you can actually experience mind. You can only experience the effect of mind. That's one. The other one, he said in English, and he said that it actually come from the Agama Sutta. And many times when Master Jiru said that it comes from the Sutta, I can never find them. I can never find them. I don't know if he heard it directly from Buddha himself, maybe, but I can't find them. So this is one thing that he said that I can't find, and he says, "No, I'm very limited in what I know, but I'm just kidding." So he says, if I translate it, and I have never seen this translated in English, and it basically says that if there is one Dharma, okay, now did I spell it wrong? No, Dharma. Now notice I used lowercase d as opposed to capital D. So there's three definitions for Dharma. One is mental activity, so because when you talk about the eye, the nose, the ear, the tongue, the skin, and the mind, and then the corresponding physics is the sight, the smell, the taste, the sound, and the touch, and the Dharma. Okay, so in that case, the little a, Dharma, just means all the mental phenomena, all the stuff that goes on, all the electricity that goes on into your brain. There's another definition for Dharma, which is methodology. Okay, and then finally, the most important definition for Dharma with a capital D is the truth of the universe. So here, I just want to make sure that because it comes from the Chinese word fa right here. So I'm going to translate it directly into Dharma. So basically it says if there's one method which can directly allow you to reach nirvana, it would be the mindfulness of body. Now, of course, the word for mindfulness of body is Gaya, Gata, Sati. Sati is mindfulness. Gaya is the body, the rupa Gaya, remember? So basically what Master says is that if there is one method that will allow you to reach nirvana, that would be the mindfulness of body. Right? Now keep in mind that when he used the word nirvana is in the context of the Theravada study, which is that when you reach arahantship, you already escape samsara, then that's the first stage of nirvana, something that Josh had just mentioned earlier. But whereas the Mahayana, the Chinese monks, they think that you have to reach Buddhahood in order to be called nirvana. Okay, so there's a little slight difference there. Now this is a good piece of information here. So the point is that what we're doing is all about the mindfulness of body. And what I'm about to explain is my understanding of Master's teaching on how we can go from A to Z. How we could start with breathing exercise and joint exercise and eventually become enlightened, okay? Because here, what Master says is that if there's one method that would allow you to go from A to Z all the way to nirvana, it would be the mindfulness of body, right? So I heard that and I said, I got to figure this one out. So this is actually the pretext for this presentation is I'm trying to report to you that I think I have figured out, but I'm not 100% certain, okay? So I'll start with this chart now. Okay, go ahead.
Well, Denny, I can give you some verification on that too, by the way.
Go ahead, please.
Slide. Well, real quickly, what was the thing for Dharma? I have methodology and reality, but what was the first interpretation you had of it?
Mental phenomena.
Phenomena, okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to back up just one quick?
Yeah.
So yeah, the thing about there is no mind, I'll just start at that top. That's right, because how can you actually prove it? We can't sense it. Using our other five senses, there's really no way to sense the mind. So we can't really prove that a mind really exists, right? Directly with our senses. So yes, but we can see the effects of it. The other thing with Dharma, I think in a different tradition, it's called, they usually say, well, there's a Dharma that means the teachings of the Buddha, and then there's the Dharma that means, reality, truth of the way things actually are. And as far as reaching Nibbana directly, from what I remember in the suttas, that the Buddha said that the whole universe is within this fathom-long body. And the fathom is, of course, an ancient or an older unit of measurement, right? And I want to say I heard somebody say once that, maybe that after the Buddha died, somebody asked Ananda who would be our teacher now. And I thought one person said the interpretation was that, well, mindfulness of the body will be our teacher now. But now don't hold me to that. I don't know if that's 100%
No,
correct or
it's
not.
actually that's a very famous saying is that sila is a teacher,
I
the
see.
discipline
Okay.
is a teacher, and mindfulness is our foundation.
Ah.
So there was
Oh,
it
and
was
then,
yeah. So he actually asked it was who was his attendant? What's his name?
Ananda's attendant or the Buddha's attendant?
Ananda.
Ananda,
Ananda.
yeah, yeah.
The story was that when as Buddha was dying, reaching nirvana, ultimate nirvana, Ananda, who was his attendant, was actually his cousin, I think,
Yes.
cousin or nephew, I forgot,
His
and he
cousin.
was crying. Yeah, he was crying. He was crying. So he's 40 years old because he was born on the day when Buddha reached enlightenment, and so he's 40 years old and he was crying like a baby, and so one of his elders says, "Why are you crying? Why don't you make use of time and ask the Buddha some important questions?" So he asked him 4 questions, and the first one was that, "Teacher, when you pass away, who is our teacher?" And the answer is that discipline, the precepts, the sila, that would be your teacher. The second question is that when you passed away, who is our anchor, right? Who is going to be at the anchor of a pursuit or the foundation? And then Buddha says mindfulness would be your anchor or your foundation of pursuit. And then the other two are not as important here. Yeah.
Very cool.
Now,
And then the only, go ahead.
yeah, yeah.
The only other thing I wanted to
now,
say was,
the reason. Let me just say.
Sure.
Because this go back to what you just said, and then you can start a new topic.
Okay.
And I want you to finish. Sorry about
Sure.
that. So it's important to distinguish between Dharma, as in Buddha's teaching, versus Sutta, which is a record of the Buddha's teaching, because Sutta is just a documentation, okay. Whereas Dharma, so if you didn't hear it from Buddha himself, then you couldn't say for sure that the Sutta is Dharma, okay. And even if you heard it directly from Buddha himself, you have to accept that possibility that because you're limited understanding, that what you heard is not Dharma. But the important thing is that what Buddha said is Dharma. Okay? And it's important to understand that methodology is so what Buddha said is Dharma, and the mental phenomena is Dharma, and the truth of the universe is also Dharma. And the reason that the three are called Dharma is because for Buddha is one of the same.
Very cool.
See,
I haven't heard it laid out.
His
like that.
mental phenomena is the truth. His truth is what he said, and what he said is and go on and on and on. So all three are Dharma, right?
They all, at that point, they all interweave. Yes. So
yeah.
Very
now,
cool.
okay. So continue, Josh. You had something else.
I was just going to go.
Unless you forgot by now.
No, I was just going to move this on to the next slide too, and wanted to point out when we do experience, the senses. Obviously, there's the sense organ, so there has to be an organ for us to experience the sense. Then there has to be an object. And then there's the consciousness between. So there's the just the eye, the physical eye, the object that's being looked at, and then eye consciousness. So there's those 6 consciousnesses we've talked about the other ones, but now Denny is going to relate them again to the elements, which I find fascinating. And I'm glad this teaching's been shared.
because in order to understand Master Jiru's teaching is you must understand the 4 elements. Because his mindfulness of the body technique is all about contemplation, and it always starts with contemplating the 4 elements. Okay, so it's easy to say that the 4 elements is the earth, the water, the wind, and the fire, but you must have a definition of what they are. You can't just say earth means dirt. That's not going to work, right? So I like this interpretation, and I'm going to stick to it, which is that earth is what you can see, what you can smell, what you can taste, and what you can touch. And
this is
wind
like
is what you can touch. Yeah.
This is like a great verification, and I was going to ask you too, if you know of any specific 4 elements practice, because I'm working on I've been collecting information for a long time to do a presentation just on the four elements itself. And the way I've usually heard it taught through Theravada type things is they focus on, like, for earth element, it's solidity. Well, actually there's various ones for earth, but it's solidity, like the bones. There's other ones too, but I'll skip those. Water is like fluidity, cohesiveness. And fire is just temperature, and wind is movement. Now, there's people that give slight variations on that, but that's experienced in the body, and the same type of element that's within the body is pretty much more or less the same thing as the elements outside the body too. So Do you know of any, like, specific four element teachings?
There's so many different interpretations. There's so many.
Well, I mean, for
so
practice,
rather than
practice.
So I usually, I just say, here's my definition, and and I like it, and so I'll use it. But if you have a different interpretation, I'm okay with that too. But I think one thing worth mentioning is that you don't actually experience. It's very rare that you would experience one of those by itself. It's always a combination. Okay,
that's the
just
thing.
Keep that in mind.
Yes.
Yeah, keep that in mind. Now, let's go on.
Well, hang on, just real quick. Practicing, and I don't know if Denny's ever done specific four element practices, but that's right. They can't be held in isolation. I think some people do, for practice sake, try to break them down individually, but that's only for an experience, to try to experience. But yeah, they can't really be separated from themselves, right? They can't exist in isolation without the others.
Correct.
All right.
Okay, so now I want to talk about my understanding of what Master Jiu had taught us, and how it is the foundation of our Saturday practice. And that is start with the four elements. Okay? With understanding that there's fire, there's earth, there's water, and there's wind. And then the next thing is to talk about the four postures. And this is one of the things that is very unique about Master Jiru's teaching, is that we don't just sit. Okay? In fact, as far as we're concerned, there's 5 postures. There's also the exercise. Now, of course, you can argue that exercise is sort of like standing and walking combined. Okay? A little bit of both. Now, I added the word called mighty, and I never seen that word in like that. And the reason is that the Chinese phrase for the 4 postures doesn't get translated. So there's 4, and then there's sort of the posture, maybe the symbolism, maybe, and then there's a word here that never get translated. There's a word here that never get translated, and so I just go ahead and translate it as mighty, and so but whatever it is, it's important to say that it's not just posture. It's some kind of noble form. And the reason I believe why we say that is because human is the only species in the animal kingdom is capable of all 4. Okay? So that to me says that it would be a shame you don't make use of it. Okay? Now, what's interesting is that Master's teaching basically associate these 4 postures with the 4 elements. So, example, he says standing is a posture that accentuate the fire, because fire in this case is, say, the muscle. Is that if you stand, especially so he always talk about you stand like the pine tree, the foot are firmly on the ground, growing roots, and then the rest of the body has to be flexible. So you have to unlock your knee, let the muscle take over. So as a result, the fire element grows in you. And then sitting is the solidity part, is the earth element, where you're supported in the upper body by yourself, and then the lower body is. So we talk about sitting as in sitting like a bell. So your waist down is the pedestal for the bell. Your spine, your body is actually like the clapper on the bell that is hang from the ceiling. And so the proper way of sitting is where you use essentially no muscle. You're just basically stacking on top of each other using only your structure. Now, the lying down, and Master talks about that being a water element because there's no form, there's no shape. You just lie there, and you're not supporting with anyone. But yet we say we lie like the bow, like bow and arrow. So a bow looks very static, but it's full of energy. And so the idea that just because you're lying down doesn't mean you're dead. You're actually full of energy. It's just that you don't support your body anymore. And in that case, the water is like a nutrient. It's like replenishing your body. And then finally, walking. Now, remember we said that wind is something that you can feel, but you cannot touch. No, something that you can touch, but you cannot. You only know the presence, but you cannot see it, you cannot smell it, you cannot taste it. So wind in this case is much more to do with your nerve sensing. And the way Master teach walking is all about the touch. It's all about really making yourself very sensitive to the bodily contact with your environment. Now, what's interesting is that Master not only associate the posture with the element, but he also used them interchangeably by explaining how each of the element has both a positive and a negative. So, for example, he talks about the earth. Earth is dirt, is solidity. So you use that to build your house. But you have too much of it, you would be buried in it. Okay? Now, water is what you use to irrigate your dirt. So you add your vitality to your dirt. But you could be drowned in it. Similar with fire, earth needs warmth because nothing else grows, unless there's a little bit of warmth. But you could be incinerated with fire. And similarly with wind, wind adds ventilation to your dirt, but you could be, blown down by the wind. So the idea then is that you have to understand the interoperability between the postures. So one thing that Master says is that don't just wake up in the morning and sit. Right? This is one thing that he's really against, is that you come to the Dharma hall, you stand because you're not even wake up yet. So you stand and you let the fire element rise in you. And he talks about how, but when you start to feel sweat, then you sit. You don't want to overdo it. And then he talks about how, for example, when you're tired, at night, and you still want to meditate, when you're tired at night, you should go to sleep. But if you still want to meditate, then you lie down first, and then you let your body, recover itself before you sit again. Sitting is always the central posture, and you just he talks about these things that help each other. Similar walking, sometimes you might have too much energy. And you get too nervous, and so walking becomes a very good practice. So I like the way he mix and match these different postures, and the idea, and it's very rare. I mean, I've been with him for 3 years before the pandemic. It's very rare that he would ask his students to sit more than 20 minutes. I mean, he would even go as far as saying that 30 minutes is the limit. 40 minutes, that's crazy. An hour today, that is ridiculous. So 2 days, yes, but keep changing back and forth because he talks about how if you don't have enough fire, that means you don't even have circulation in your body and blood flow and all that. Then the best you can do would be lazy Zen, sleeping through the whole thing. And if you don't have the concentration and your mind is wandering, then you have what is called the monkey Zen. None of that is good for you, right? You need quality, not quantity. Now the next slide is when he brings the concept of the elements and the posture into this one thing that he talks about, which is that if there is one method that will lead you to nirvana, it would be the mindfulness of body. And so let's talk about mindfulness. So in this case, there's the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So the word 4 actually never appeared in the sutta. Okay? The sutta is Satipatthana Sutta. Sati is mindfulness, and Patthana, and you mentioned in one of the email that sometimes people call foundation, and sometimes people call it something else, and that's because Patthana could be also Upatthana. and it's a slight different interpretation. One is a foundation, and the other one is more like the 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 uh, the attention or something else. But anyway, in the sutta, they never really separate into four as if you have to go from one to two to three to four. It's more about the four aspects of the mindfulness, and that's the body, the feeling, the mind, and the Dhamma. Okay. Now, this is something that no one talks about like that. And Master would say, well, let's just think about those four in terms of the four postures. And so basically, he basically says that standing is when you can really observe your body. And sitting down is when you can really observe your feeling or your sensation. And then lying down is you can't experience anything else but the effect of your mind. Not the mind, but the effect of the mind. And finally, he thought that Dhamma would have to be something to do with walking. Okay? And he even has stories about he actually entered into samadhi while walking. All right. So now, let's move on to the next slide. And Josh?
Well, it might be a good time to comment now if you want to go back to the other slide. So, when I first heard these teachings, it just made complete sense to me. Although I'd never heard them anywhere else. The four main postures, the four major postures, and how they correlate. Fire, standing. It's just like that energy will just flow up. And I know late at night sometimes if I wait too long to meditate, then I will stand up because, as far as I know, nobody's ever fallen asleep standing up before, right? You can't, obviously if you want to continue practice, like Denny said, you lay down and rest first, but it's almost impossible to fall asleep when you're standing up because of the kind of the fire energy. And then, the sitting, obviously.
Not only that, you need your mind, you need your thinking mind to stand. The body has to the body has to adjust. It's what we call the unstable posture.
That's right, because I have actually kind of fell asleep, but I only tilt just a little bit, wake right back up.
Yeah. So it's a very good way to actually practice mindfulness because it's half of it is already done for you.
That's right. Yes. And in the sitting, you just look at like a mountain or a huge stone or something, talk about the earth element, it's just stable and, sit like the bell. A bell is really stable when it's sitting down, right? Or the part side of it. In water, there's no resistance, right? So water follows the least resistance, right? So you're not fighting. It's just gonna completely relax and just go whatever you're laying on, conform to whatever you're laying on for the while. And then wind, the movement, walking, I mean, that's so obvious, right? So wind is movement, blowing and movement. And then, but this is when Denny just did this thing with the four right knowings, that's, those are new to me and they make total sense as well. And I'm glad for that.
Yeah. Well, sometimes Master make them up as he goes.
Well, I mean, that's Zen, right?
I mean,
absolutely.
No. I mean, seriously, there are two kinds of teachers. Okay, there are two kinds of teachers. I was a professor for 9 years. I can tell you for a fact that when we teach undergraduates, we teach from the book. Okay, and when we teach graduate students, we teach from experience. So there are people who teach based on what they read and how they interpret, and then there are people who teach based on the experience, and then they would go and find words and interpret it their own way.
That's right.
I
love both modalities. Yeah, it was a good sign of a good teacher for me. Yeah, exactly. Can do both. Yeah, what Denny mentioned though, the four foundations of mindfulness. Actually, my original point was just a very minor one for the original topic. Was that it's for years it was translated as the four foundations of mindfulness. I know people in Theravada now are often translating it as the four establishments of mindfulness. Now, it's a subtle distinction because it used to be four foundations. You would get a foundation and then you would use your mindfulness from there. But now if you frame it, if it's framed in terms of the establishments of mindfulness, well, then it's kind of like you're only mindful of just what you're establishing it, right? So there's no, that's it. But I've also heard it as
it's like the four corner versus the four wall. The
Ah,
four corners is the foundation, but
right.
now you have to build a wall, and then now the
Yes.
establishment is kind of like that. How do I know if I'm doing it right? Yeah, yeah,
I also like attending too, the word attending. So this is how you attend with mindfulness. So you establish or have this as a foundation, then you attend in this way with this way that we're talking about. Then you attend
correct,
to
correct.
whatever as well.
Correct,
Okay.
correct, correct, correct. Very good. Okay, now I make a joke about how often Master Guru will say, from the sutta, this is this. And then I said I can never find it. I don't know what he's talking about. He must have heard it directly from Buddha himself. But there was one time that he did quote something from the Nirvana Sutta. This is the last documentation of what Buddha said before he passed into Nirvana. And again, I don't have the English translation, so I have to kind of make it up myself. And it basically says, again, using the Dharma or methodology. No, actually, now this time the word Dharma is not methodology. This time Dharma is all phenomenon. Okay, specifically, in this case, it's all mental phenomenons. In other words, all of not just the physical phenomenon, but the mental, or maybe it encompasses everything, all phenomenon, and basically says that all phenomenons are impermanent, meaning that these phenomena comes together when the condition is correct, and then they will disappear when the condition is correct again. Right, condition has to come together before something happens. Whether so it's basically that all phenomenons are impermanent. All phenomenons are rising and fading away, and when the rising and fading ceases, then you have reached nirvana. So this is actually supposedly from Buddha's mouth, and it's a very important part of the Nirvana Sutta. It documents what he said, in his final days, and it's basically that explains what nirvana is. Nirvana is a sensation of rising and failing. Now, going back to the slide that we had for Einstein, and if you work your way back, okay, because it was from space to time, from time to rising and fading. So again, it means that when time and space, when the notion of time and space cease to exist, then you are in nirvana. Okay, and the way to the further explain it is that when you have time and space, then there's rising and fading. Now, this is very interesting because now we're going to go back to Master's teaching once again. Now,
Denny, I would just weigh in real quick. Yeah, there's 32 synonyms for nibbana. So I've got a post on my site. If you're interested on that, you could maybe check that out. One of them, I think, is cessation, right? Or relinquishment,
yes.
right? And the fourth foundation of mindfulness in Pali is dhammas, plural. And like Denny was saying, sometimes that's interpreted as phenomenon. And some people interpret it as contents of mind. The technical way is it's a list of other lists, though. There's a list of other lists is another one. And then, maybe I'll include also in the Pali and Theravada the last words of the Buddha. I think Denny's quote there was really helpful too. So that's really cool. I'm not familiar with the Nibbana Sutta. All right.
Yeah. Now, there's a phrase. There's a phrase of 4 verses. There's 4 verses that are very, very popular among the Mahayana nuns. I have never seen it in the Theravada, and it talks about the contemplation of the 4 foundations: the body, the feeling, the mind, and the Dhamma, and what each one of them represents. And this is very, very common. Everybody says it. Everybody says it as if they understand it. What's interesting is that Master said it completely different. Some of them are the same, but very different. And so rather than comparing the more common versions versus Master version, because that will take some time and it's probably not really what we want to do, I just interpret what he said. Okay? Translate what he said. So basically he says this is the beginning, as you begin to contemplate your body, you would realize that the body is not solid or not firm. as you begin to contemplate your feeling, you realize that. Now, it's important that we understand in this case is the feeling, because in the past we talked about sensation and perception. So this way, I for a while I was going to use, because the Chinese word can mean both. And so I use the word feeling because that's a literal translation, but in reality it's really more about the combination of sensation and perception. In other words, if you are able to sense without assigning a value to what you sense, this is what we said, attention without intention, then there's no suffering, there's no dukkha. Okay, so it's when you feel, meaning that you use both your sense store and your brain, then you will end up with suffering. Okay, this is very important. This is actually very important, because when Master, and I was there when Master, I picked up Master from the airport, and we started talking, and he has this revelation, and the revelation was that he is not going to teach beginners anymore. Okay, he's going to let his student teach beginner because he doesn't have enough time, and he's going to concentrate on teaching, advanced students. And so from now on, he's going to focus on the contemplation of feeling, and he's going to teach Yi Jing Jing, because Yi Jing Jing is like the 5 breathing exercise to the contemplation of body, whereas when you practice the contemplation of body, you have to practice the breathing exercise, and when you practice the contemplation of feeling, you have to practice Yi Jing. And he said, he actually said, explained it, and he says the reason is that feeling can be pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor pleasant. Those are the 3 feelings they have to do with your thinking brain, and we don't want that. We want to go beyond that, and we want to go to the kind of feeling that is really, he used the Chinese word that meant, I don't want to use the word renunciate, but essentially no thinking kind of feeling, just sensation without perception. And so he elaborate on that. But the point is that that if it's, so in fact he explained the word sama, which is right. What makes something right? What makes mindfulness right? What makes knowing right? Right is when you're not hindered by your 5 hindrances. No thinking, no attachment, no aversion, and so forth. Okay, so that's what he said about the foundation of feeling. Now, what's interesting is that he changed the mind. The mind in the traditional way is about no self, and he changes that. He says, when you contemplate your mind, it's about contemplating the rising and fading. So his technique is really actually starting with the contemplation of the 4 elements to the contemplation of the rising and fading. In fact, he talks about not participating in your breath. Let your body breathe on its own and observe your breath as it is just rising and fading. And so he talks a great deal about it. Now, the funny things he talks about is, he says, but contemplation of Dhamma doesn't make sense. He says, I've never been able to contemplate Dhamma because Dhamma is not standalone. Contemplate is embedded in the first 3. So I that's why we talk about, Dhamma no drama. Now, what's interesting, go ahead, Josh. Go ahead.
Oh, just a few things, and that's the feeling thing. If I don't know if you can hear this in the background, my refrigerator is making strange sounds. So the feeling, that's right, because it's only when we start assigning perceptions to these sensations or the way we're sensing with our sense organs, then that's when the possibility of dukkha at least increases, right? So if it's just pure sensing, then and there's no perceptions, no labeling of anything, then it's just like, And then the rising and fading, we all know that on the night of the Buddha's enlightenment, right? He was said to start reviewing his past lives and then seeing the transmigration of other lives coming and going into other lives. But then he turned his mind to this rising and fading, this impermanent nature. And from what I'm gathering from Theravada, that's actually how he started to attain enlightenment, is turning his mind to the impermanent nature, the anicca, thing. And
Yes.
then the Dhammas, that I've tried that too. There's a whole list, there's the 4 foundations of mindfulness, 5 hindrances, 5 sense bases, the 6 sense bases, I won't go through them all here, the 7 factors of enlightenment. So technically in the sutta, there's like these 5 different lists that are technically, and, to try to contemplate, well, I don't know, I'll just stop there.
Yeah. We talk about that, the 40 ways of contemplating, yeah, all that. Okay, now this is very interesting. I actually I remember he said that in one of the lecture, and then right after we got on the plane, and I made a mistake of actually getting a assigned seat next to his. That's never been pleasant. And so after that one experience, I escaped to the back of the cabin, and I stay away from him for as long as I can until we get off the plane again. So I sat next to him, and he is, like when he flies, his students would buy him not a first class ticket, but sometimes a business class, and sometimes a premier coach, and like that. And so if I follow him, I would be sitting next to him, but he completely wastes those things, because he doesn't drink, he doesn't eat meat, he doesn't even use the leg room, because he just meditate. He puts his legs up and meditate. So I'm sitting next to him, and I said, Master, you just mentioned these 4 things, and then I just, like, the next few slides is what I said. I said, doesn't that lead to this, and lead to that, and lead to that? And he looks at me, and he turned back, and he went back to his meditation. And I sat through that whole journey like a fool, thinking like, what did I say? What did I do? What did I do? I thought I was being so smart. So like half an hour later, he turns to me and says, so do I need to add anything more? He basically said, yeah, what you said is right. That's exactly what I meant. Okay, so what did he say? What did I say? So I said, here's the 3 Dharma seals, or 4 Dharma seals, or the 4 marks of existence. They're very similar. First of all, if you want to call this the 4 Dharma seals, then is impermanence, nirvana, dukkha, nirvana, and non-self. Okay, those are they call the Dharma seal, meaning that if you reach nirvana, those are the 4 things that you would experience. Those are the Dharma. Those are the truth of our existence that you would experience. Now, it turns out that the 4 can be reduced into 1, because dukkha, suffering, and impermanence is one of the same. Right? We suffer because we think that something should be impermanent is actually permanent, meaning that if we don't like something, we don't want it to go away, and if we like something, we don't want it to go away. So that's the difference between attachment and aversion. But on the other hand, if it's impermanent, it will go away on its own, and whether it's something you like or you don't like. So the 3 seals, the 3 Dharma seals, is just that. It's impermanent, it's nirvana, it's non-self. That's what it says. Okay, now, what does that mean? Oh, back off. It means that the way that Master teaches the 4 foundation mindfulness, the body, contemplation of the body, would allow you to experience impermanence and dukkha. Okay, and by the contemplation of the mind, experiencing the rising and fading, ultimately will lead you to nirvana. And finally, the idea that when you get to the end, Dharma is no drama, that the Dharma is not standalone, then that means that you experience that emptiness and non-self. Okay? Now, what's interesting is that correspond to the seal is what's called the gate of liberation. Now, the gate of liberation is not 3 consecutive gates, and the Master actually explains that. It's not 3 consecutive gates. It's actually 3 gates that you can choose one. And when you pass the gate, you're liberated. You don't need to come back and do it a second time. That would be crazy. Okay? So the 3 gates that you can choose, one is called the desireless gate, one is called the signless gate, and one is called the emptiness gate. So essentially, by having everything else culminates into this idea of having your practice reduced to one of contemplating rising and fading would open up this thing called the sinus gate, the one that has where the notion of time and space no longer exists. That's it. That's what I asked him if that is true on the plane, and he ignored me for half an hour. Before he returns, he says, "Do I need to add anything anymore?" So what did I learn? What did I learn from all this over the 3 years and the 5-6 years that I've been practicing on my own and with Master? I think these are the things that I want to summarize in what I have learned and what I have yet to learn.
Denny, is it
Yes.
possible? Oh, sorry. Before you jump into the slide, to comment very briefly on this. These liberation gates are really profound. The way I understand them are it's also known as the three characteristics of existence, right? The seals.
That's the flip side of it.
That's
the
right.
seals are called. They're not exactly the same. They're not.
That's right.
It's
Because
like, the seal is when you reach liberation. The characteristic
I
is
see.
before you reach liberation.
I see.
They're
Okay.
similar, but not the same. Yeah.
Gotcha. Now the death or the desireless gate. So impermanence. One of the best ways I've heard of impermanent. It's kind of inconstancy too. So no matter how we try to arrange external conditions in our lives to get things the way we want, but we realize that we can't maintain those external conditions the way we want in the long run. So it's not a success for happiness in the long run.
That's correct.
So what?
So this, So this is almost like desiredness is almost like non-attachment.
That's right. So what I'm getting at here is when you realize that no matter what we do on the external to try to maintain things to our liking, eventually we can't keep that up. It's not. So then when we see that, there's less and less desire for things. Oh, I want to go do this, and I have to have things this way. It's what we call
fool's errand.
That's right.
It's what we call fool's errand.
That there's no way to keep going like that, then we just start desiring less and less, because what's the point of spending so much time and energy doing all that, right? And then the signless gate, I'm going to pass on that too, because that's the one that I have that word signless. I don't completely fully understand that, but the
it's
emptiness
really bad
gate,
translation. Yeah, it's bad.
Well, no,
translation.
it's off. Yeah, but that's used a lot. Signless, that's used a lot, and then the emptiness is just. There is no, if you look at everything, especially since everything's impermanent, always changing, non-maintainable in the long run, there's no essence. So because of that, you can't boil anything down to its essence. So everything is basically empty of an essence. So that's what I always ask, well, what's it empty of? And that's one of the translations. So, all right, Denny, let's,
if I may, I know you're running up to your stop, or maybe even beyond. So think of this way. This is how I understand it. That if you talk about nirvana as just necessary Buddhahood, but at least outside of the three realms, and you have escape samsara. So what are the three ways to do that? Most common way, and the most common way, one is the Theravada practice, where you try to achieve arahantship. Okay, that's crossing the emptiness gate. Okay. Now I forgot the word, but there's another way of becoming Buddha. What is that called when you just basically observing the 12 links of interdependence, understanding how the nature behave itself? You know what I'm talking about?
I'm not sure. No.
Well, the one where he says that is someone that he doesn't even know the existence of Buddha and Buddha's teaching, but somehow he figured out on his own.
Oh yeah.
And become enlightened.
Well, there's the private Buddhas too. It's not that one though.
Yeah,
right?
it is that one.
Yeah. They can't. They understand, but they can't teach other people, right?
Or that they experience on their own, without really relying on any previous people's teaching. So they just basically observe the nature, and he's essentially observing the impermanence of nature, and become liberated, become emancipated. That's a desire state.
It starts with the P, Buddha. I think it means private Buddha. But I'm not sure.
So that's the desireless gate. That person crosses that gate. Now, so the question is, what is a sinus gate? Well, a lot of people, they chant Amita Buddha. Okay, but most of the people who chant Amita Buddha don't know what Amita Buddha stands for. Amita is both Amitabha and Amitayu. Those are the two. They actually have two names. Means none, zero, opposite, right? Amita is basically beyond time. Amitayu is beyond space. So the Amita Buddha is actually a select Buddha who's beyond both time and space. So that is the Amit Buddha. So if you chant Amita Buddha, then and you're successful, then you enter the non-sign gate. Okay.
That's
All right,
beautiful,
so,
Denny. I'm gonna have to leave, and I'm gonna let Denny wrap this up. I apologize for
okay. Thank you,
for
Josh.
this, but it's okay.
I'll see you soon.
Yes,
Yeah,
and we'll be in
I'll see you
touch soon.
So make sure you watch this because there's more to come. There's
That's
the
right.
sequel.
All right.
Thank you so
Bye
much.
now.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So he left me on my own. Man, that's dangerous. So this is the last slides anyway. So these are the things that I have learned that I think is worthy of summarizing, and it also represents what I try to do during our Saturday practice, is that we don't there's no mind. We just all we're doing is expressing the effect of a mind. Okay, that's one. The second one is that the reason why we practice qi, and again, this is unique. The qi, the understanding of qi is unique to the Taoists, and the Taoist represents thousands of years of Chinese culture. And when the Taoists really experience qi, they experience it through meditation. So that makes the Taoist is sort of a subset of the yogic practice. And yoga, the word yoga, yoj, Y-U-J, means the union. It's actually the harness between the oxen. It's the word for the yoke. Is the word for the harness before the oxen as they pull the cart, so that you synchronize them. So the idea of the word yoga or yoj is that you want to achieve synchronicity or unity between your mind and your body. And the harness in this case, our interpretation of the harness is the qi. So we talk about the physical body, the qi body, and then the mind body. So we practice qi not only for physical health, but also as a way of bringing our mind and our body together. And then the next thing is that people talk about emotional intelligence, as in saying that we want to be a little bit more intelligent about our emotion, which obviously is important, but people often forget the other definition for the word intelligence, as in central intelligence agency. You need some way in your practice. It's not theory, it's very practical. You need some way of understanding your emotional state. And in my practice, in our practice, as we develop our breath and develop mindfulness of our breath and mindfulness of our body, they become very sensitive. They actually become very sensitive. They are like the canary in the cave mine, that as soon as your mind wants to degenerate into the hindrances, the first thing that your body would react and your breath would react. So they become the intelligence into your emotion. So that's important to me. That's what I learned. Now, in the Buddhist teaching, they talk about the 84,000 called Dhamma Kanja, which translate into Chinese as the gates to Dhamma. So the idea is that Buddha himself is in possession of 84,000 methodology in achieving liberation. Now, why is it 84,000? Actually, it's 84,000 because he was a teacher for about 45 years, right? He renunciated when he was 39, and it took him 6 years to become enlightened, and then 29, and then it took him 6 years to become. So he was enlightened when he was 35, and then he achieved nirvana when he was 80. So he spent 45 years as a teacher. And so if you take 45 years, 365 days a year, and multiply that, and then multiply 5, which is the number of times that he was able to teach, because in the old tradition, it's not 24 hours, it's not even 12. It's 6 different time period within a day, one of which is used for sleeping. And so he was able to, at best, teach 5 times. So if you take 45, 365, and 5, that's 84,000. So the fact that he had 84,000 methods just meant that he had 84 different opportunity to teach his technique to different audience, and each time he tuned it a little bit differently depending on the audience. So out of the 84,000, rising and fading is my gate. Okay, so that's why I focus on rising and fading. Rising and fading initially as rising and fading in terms of a bodily function, like a breath, and then ultimately rising and fading in terms of a mental phenomenon, one at a time. Okay, so of course I'm long way from that, but that's in summary, in a nutshell, the meaning behind the Saturday practice. Okay, so with that, a big thanks to Josh for tolerating me for so long, and a big thanks for all of you who are watching live and of those who will be watching recorded. With that, I bid you goodbye, and I wish you joy, peace, and health.